The first shot cracked through the still prairie air like thunder on a cloudless day, but it was the second bullet that shattered Grace Norwood's life forever. Standing frozen on the wooden porch of Dawson's General Store, she watched in horror as Mayor Holloway's revolver smoked in his hand, the banker's body slumping to the dirt road of Silver Creek, Colorado. The year was 1876, and Grace had just witnessed cold-blooded murder in broad daylight. "He didn't even draw his weapon," she whispered, her knuckles white as she gripped the railing. Around her, the townsfolk stood silent, faces grim but unsurprised. Mayor Holloway tucked his pistol back into its holster with practiced ease, straightened his vest, and addressed the gathering crowd as if he'd merely swatted a fly. "Unfortunate business with Mr. Prescott here. Man pulled a gun on me when I confronted him about the missing town funds. Clear case of self-defense." But Grace had seen everything from where she stood. There had been no gun, no threat. Only words between them before the shooting words about ledgers and discrepancies and accusations that the mayor himself was stealing from the town's coffers. "That's not what happened," she found herself saying, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. Mr. Prescott was unarmed. Every head turned toward her, and Mayor Holloway's face darkened like a storm cloud. "Miss Norwood, you're clearly mistaken. The shock of witnessing such violence has confused you." "I'm not confused," Grace insisted, stepping down from the porch. 24 years old and unmarried, she'd built a respectable life as Silver Creek schoolteacher. People trusted her with their children. They would believe her. "I saw everything. Mr. Prescott never drew a weapon. This wasn't self-defense." The mayor's smile never reached his eyes. Ladies often become hysterical in these situations. Someone should escort Miss Norwood home to rest. "I know what I saw," she repeated, looking around at the faces of people she'd known for years, neighbors, parents of her students, fellow churchgoers. But no one would meet her gaze. Not one person stepped forward to support her. That night, Grace sat alone at her small kitchen table, hands trembling around a cup of cold tea. A knock at the door startled her. Sheriff Miller stood on her porch, hat in hand, his weathered face apologetic. "Evening, Miss Norwood. The town council met this afternoon. I'm afraid they've decided to relieve you of your teaching position, effective immediately." "Because I spoke the truth about what the mayor did," the sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "They're calling it emotional instability. Miss Waters will take over the school tomorrow. I'm sorry, Grace." Within a week, Grace discovered what it truly meant to be shunned. Parents crossed the street to avoid her. The general store clerk claimed they were out of whatever items she requested. The church pews emptied around her on Sunday. The whispers followed her everywhere: troublemaker, liar, mentally unwell. Mayor Holloway had turned the entire town against her with frightening efficiency. By the end of the month, Grace knew she couldn't stay. With barely enough money for a stagecoach ticket, she packed her meager belongings into a single trunk. Her destination was the growing town of Redemption, nearly 100 miles west, far enough, she hoped, to start over where no one knew her name or the hysteria that had supposedly overcome her. The stagecoach lurched westward through the rugged Colorado terrain, carrying Grace and her broken dreams away from the only home she'd known since arriving out west as a young woman. She stared out the window as Silver Creek disappeared from view, wondering if speaking the truth had been worth losing everything. "Next stop still 4 hours away," the driver called back to his passengers. "But there's a trading post ahead where we'll water the horses." Grace barely acknowledged the announcement, lost in her thoughts. The stagecoach had 3 other passengers, an older couple returning to their ranch and a businessman who hadn't looked up from his ledger since they'd departed. None had shown any interest in conversation, which suited Grace fine. The trading post appeared on the horizon, a ramshackle collection of buildings that had sprung up at a natural crossroads. As the stage rolled to a stop, Grace descended, grateful to stretch her legs. That's when she heard the commotion. "You're a liar and a cheat." A burly man with a thick beard was shouting at a leaner figure whose back was to Grace. "Ain't nobody got that kind of luck with cards." The accused man stood his ground, seemingly unperturbed. "Sir, I won fair and square. Perhaps next time you should fold when holding nothing but a pair of fours." The first man reached for his gun, but before he could draw, the lean stranger had produced his own weapon with lightning speed. "I wouldn't," he said calmly. The bearded man froze, face reddening with fury and embarrassment. After a tense moment, he spat on the ground. "Keep your winnings. Ain't worth dying over." He stalked away, cursing under his breath. The stranger holstered his revolver and turned, revealing a handsome face with piercing blue eyes under the brim of a worn cowboy hat. He caught Grace staring and tipped his hat slightly. "Madam," he said with a nod before heading toward the trading post's small saloon. Grace realized she'd been holding her breath. There was something compelling about the man, not just his quick reflexes or striking features, but a quiet confidence that seemed to surround him like an aura. The stagecoach driver called for passengers to return, and Grace reluctantly climbed back aboard. As they pulled away, she found herself glancing back at the trading post, wondering about the mysterious stranger she'd likely never see again. 2 days later, Grace arrived in Redemption, a town larger than Silver Creek but still rough around the edges. The main street bustled with activity miners heading to the foothills, ranch hands purchasing supplies, and women going about their daily business. Grace secured a small room above the millinery shop and immediately set about finding employment. By the end of her first week, her situation had grown desperate. The school already had a teacher. The general store didn't need help. The hotel had no positions available. Each night, she returned to her rented room, increasingly aware that her savings would soon run out. On her 8th day in Redemption, Grace stood outside the newspaper office, gathering courage. The Redemption Herald was a modest operation, but perhaps they needed someone who could write or proofread. She smoothed her simple blue dress, took a deep breath, and pushed open the door. The office was smaller than it appeared from outside. A large printing press dominated the space, and a cluttered desk sat by the window. A man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers looked up at her entrance. "Can I help you, miss?" "I hope so," Grace replied. "I'm looking for work. I'm educated and can write well." "I thought perhaps your newspaper might need an assistant." The editor, Mr. Parker, according to the nameplate on his desk, leaned back in his chair. "I handle the Herald mostly on my own. Can't really afford to hire anyone." Grace's heart sank, but she pressed on. "What about part-time?" "Or I could contribute articles. I was a schoolteacher before I came to Redemption." "A schoolteacher, you say?" Parker studied her with new interest. "Where did you teach?" "Silver Creek," she answered hesitantly. His eyebrows rose. "Silver Creek. I've heard some interesting rumors coming out of there recently. Something about their mayor shooting a banker and a schoolteacher having some sort of breakdown afterward." Grace stiffened. "Those rumors are incorrect, sir. The schoolteacher me witnessed Mayor Holloway murder Mr. Prescott in cold blood. When I spoke up about what I'd seen, I was dismissed from my position and essentially driven out of town." Parker's eyes widened. "That's quite an accusation, miss." "Norwood, Grace Norwood." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit down. I'd like to hear more about this." For the next hour, Grace recounted everything: the confrontation she'd witnessed, the mayor's false claim of self-defense, the town's swift rejection of her testimony, and her subsequent ostracization. When she finished, Parker removed his spectacles and polished them thoughtfully. "That's a troubling story, Miss Norwood. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon for powerful men to silence those who speak against them." "Then you believe me?" The question came out more desperately than she'd intended. "I've been running newspapers for 20 years. I've developed a sense for when someone's telling the truth." He replaced his spectacles. "Tell you what, I can't hire you full-time, but I could use someone to help with the Sunday edition. It won't be much pay, I'm afraid." "I'll take it," Grace said quickly. "And perhaps I could write a piece about what happened in Silver Creek. People should know the truth." Parker's expression grew cautious. "That's dangerous territory, Miss Norwood." Mayor Holloway might not take kindly to such an article, even from a newspaper in another town. "But, however," he continued, "I believe in printing the truth. Write your account and I'll consider it. Just be prepared for potential consequences." It wasn't the enthusiastic support she'd hoped for, but it was more than she'd received from anyone in Silver Creek. Grace left the newspaper office with her first assignment to cover the upcoming town festival and a flicker of hope that justice might eventually be served. The next morning, Grace was heading to the newspaper office when she spotted a familiar figure emerging from the barbershop. The lean cowboy from the trading post was now clean-shaven, his dark hair freshly trimmed, but she immediately recognized those piercing blue eyes. He was dressed simply but neatly in a dark shirt and vest, his gun belt visible beneath his long coat. He noticed her staring and, to her embarrassment, walked directly toward her. "Good morning, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "I believe we crossed paths at Wilson's trading post a few days back." "We did," Grace admitted. "You had a disagreement with a gentleman over a card game." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's a polite way of putting it." "Ethan Sandoval," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Grace Norwood," she replied, briefly taking his offered hand. "Are you new to redemption as well, Mr. Sandoval?" "Just passing through on business," he said. "And please call me Ethan. Mr. Sandoval makes me sound like my father." Despite herself, Grace smiled. "What business brings you to town?" Something flickered in his eyes, caution, perhaps. "A bit of this and that. I tend to go where work takes me." "A drifter, then?" "I prefer independent contractor," he replied with a hint of humor. "And what brings you to redemption, Miss Norwood? You don't strike me as someone who normally travels alone on stagecoaches." Grace hesitated. "I'm starting over. Silver Creek wasn't welcoming anymore." "Seems we might have something in common then," Ethan said. "Few people leave comfortable situations unless they're forced to." He glanced at the newspaper she was carrying. "Are you working for the Herald? Just started." "I'm covering the town festival this weekend." "Then perhaps I'll see you there," he said. "Enjoy your day, Miss Norwood." Grace watched him walk away, intrigued despite herself. There was more to Ethan Sandoval than met the eye. Something in the way he carried himself, in the careful way he spoke, suggested layers beneath his charming exterior. For the first time since leaving Silver Creek, Grace found herself genuinely curious about another person. The town festival transformed Redemption's Main Street into a lively celebration. Bunting and lanterns hung from buildings, a small band played cheerful tunes, and tables laden with food lined the thoroughfare. Grace moved through the crowds with her notebook, dutifully recording details for her article while trying not to think about how she'd been part of similar gatherings in Silver Creek before becoming an outcast. "You look like you could use this," a voice said from behind her. Ethan Sandoval stood there holding 2 cups of lemonade. "Thank you," Grace said, accepting one gratefully. "Are you enjoying the festival?" "It's pleasant enough," he replied. "Though I suspect you're not entirely present for it. Your mind seems elsewhere." Grace was taken aback by his perception. "I'm just focused on my assignment." "Of course," he nodded, though his expression suggested he didn't quite believe her. "I heard an interesting rumor today about a schoolteacher from Silver Creek who witnessed something she shouldn't have." Grace nearly choked on her lemonade. "Where did you hear that?" "Small towns run on gossip. Redemption's no exception." His voice lowered. "Is it true? About Mayor Holloway?" She glanced around nervously before responding. "Yes, he murdered the banker in cold blood, then claimed self-defense. I was the only one willing to say what actually happened." "And they ran you out of town for it," Ethan said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "How do you know so much about this?" Something hardened in his blue eyes. "Let's just say I have a particular interest in the activities of men like Mayor Holloway." Before Grace could question him further, the festival's fireworks began, drawing everyone's attention skyward. In the colorful flashes illuminating the night, She studied Ethan's profile, strong jaw, straight nose, and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Who was this man, really? As the display ended and people began dispersing, Ethan offered to walk Grace back to her lodgings. They strolled in companionable silence for a while before he spoke. "I admire what you did in Silver Creek," he said. "Standing up for the truth when everyone else looked away, that takes courage, or foolishness," Grace replied. "I lost everything: my job, my home, the respect of people I'd known for years." "Would you do it differently? If you could go back," the question gave her pause. "No," she finally answered. "I couldn't live with myself if I'd stayed silent." Ethan nodded as if her answer confirmed something for him. "I'm staying in town a bit longer than I planned," he said as they reached the millinery shop. "Perhaps you'd join me for dinner tomorrow evening?" Grace should have refused. She barely knew this man. Yet something about Ethan Sandoval made her feel understood in a way she hadn't since before the shooting. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. The next evening, they dined at the hotel restaurant, the finest establishment in Redemption, though that wasn't saying much. Grace wore her one good dress, a deep green that brought out the hazel of her eyes. Ethan looked transformed in a well-tailored dark suit, though his gun belt remained at his side, a reminder that beneath the polished exterior was a man comfortable with danger. Over their meal, Grace found herself sharing more than she'd intended about her childhood in Boston, her decision to come west after her parents died, her years teaching in Silver Creek. Ethan was an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions and offering wry observations that occasionally made her laugh despite herself. "Your turn," she said eventually. "You know my life story, but you remain a mystery." Ethan twirled his water glass thoughtfully. "Not much to tell. Born in Texas to a Mexican mother and American father. Grew up on ranches, learned to ride and shoot early. Served briefly in the Army during the war, though I was young. Since then, I've worked various jobs: ranch hand, scout, occasionally hired gun when the cause was just." "And what cause brings you to Redemption?" Grace pressed. He met her gaze directly. "Would you believe me if I said you did?" Grace's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I've been tracking Mayor Holloway's activities for some time," Ethan explained, his voice low. "He's part of a network of corrupt officials across 3 territories who have been stealing from their towns, intimidating witnesses, and occasionally eliminating threats like your banker friend." "How do you know this?" Grace whispered, leaning forward. "Because they killed my partner 2 years ago when we got too close to exposing them." His eyes held a carefully controlled pain. "I've been gathering evidence against them ever since. When I heard about what happened in Silver Creek, I knew I needed to speak with you." Grace sat back, stunned. "So our meeting at the trading post wasn't coincidence," he admitted. "I'd already learned about the schoolteacher who witnessed Holloway's crime. I arranged to be there when your stage passed through." She should have felt manipulated, used. Instead, a strange relief washed over her. "So you believe me? You know I'm telling the truth." "I never doubted it," Ethan said softly. "Your voice is the testimony I've been searching for, Grace. With your account, we might finally have enough to bring these men to justice. But it would be my word against the mayor's," she pointed out. "That wasn't enough in Silver Creek. It's different now. I have financial records showing irregularities in several towns, correspondence between the conspirators, and testimonies from others they've wronged. Your eyewitness account is the piece that connects it all." Hope and fear warred within her. "If I help you, what happens next?" "I take everything to a federal marshal I trust. There would be an investigation, likely a trial." He hesitated. "It would mean facing Holloway again, testifying publicly. And putting myself in danger," Grace added. Ethan didn't deny it. "I won't pretend it's without risk. These men have killed to protect their scheme, but I will do everything in my power to keep you safe." The intensity in his eyes made her believe him. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. He nodded, reaching across the table to briefly cover her hand with his. "Take all the time you need, but know this: you're not alone anymore, Grace. Not while I'm here." The simple touch of his hand sent an unexpected warmth through her. For weeks, she'd been isolated, rejected, doubted. Ethan's unwavering belief in her felt like stepping into sunlight after a long, dark winter. Over the next 2 weeks, Grace found herself spending more time with Ethan. They were careful to maintain the appearance of a budding courtship which, despite the circumstances that had brought them together, wasn't entirely pretense. There was an undeniable connection between them, a mutual respect that deepened with each conversation. During their walks through town or quiet dinners, Ethan shared more details about the corruption he was investigating. Mayor Holloway and his associates had been systematically embezzling from town treasuries, manipulating land deals, and silencing anyone who noticed discrepancies. The banker in Silver Creek had discovered their scheme and confronted Holloway directly, a fatal mistake. "I've decided to help you," Grace told Ethan one evening as they sat on a bench overlooking the valley. "I'll testify about what I saw." Relief and concern crossed his face. "Are you certain?" "Yes, I can't let them continue hurting people." She paused. "But first, I want to write my account for the newspaper, everything I witnessed in Silver Creek. If something happens to me, nothing will happen to you," Ethan interrupted firmly. "If something happens," she continued, "I want the truth to be on record somewhere." Reluctantly, he agreed. That night, Grace wrote her article for the Redemption Herald, a detailed, factual account of Mayor Holloway's crime and the town's subsequent cover-up. Parker read it the next morning, his face growing increasingly grave. "This is dynamite, Miss Norwood," he said when he finished. "Are you prepared for the response it will provoke?" "I am," she answered, more confidently than she felt. "Then I'll print it in Sunday's edition. But I suggest you and that cowboy friend of yours stay alert. Stories like this have consequences." The article appeared on the front page of the Sunday Herald under the headline "Murder and Corruption in Silver Creek," an eyewitness account. By noon, everyone in Redemption was talking about it. By evening, Grace received word that copies were already circulating in neighboring towns. That night, Ethan insisted on standing guard near Grace's lodgings. "Holloway will have seen the paper by now," he explained, "or at least heard about it. He won't take this lightly." His vigilance proved prescient. Shortly after midnight, Grace was awakened by shouts from the street below. Rushing to the window, she saw Ethan confronting 2 men outside the millinery shop. "That's far enough," Ethan was saying, his gun drawn. "I know who sent you." "This ain't your business, mister," one of the men growled. "We just came to have a word with the lady." "At midnight, armed? I don't think so." Ethan's voice was deadly calm. "Tell Holloway his secret's out. The federal marshal already has copies of everything, the financial records, the correspondence, Miss Norwood's testimony. Silencing her now won't save him." The standoff continued for a tense moment before the men backed away. "This ain't over," one called as they retreated into the darkness. When they were gone, Grace hurried downstairs to let Ethan in. "Are you all right?" she asked, noticing how his hand remained near his gun. "I'm fine, but you're not safe here anymore," he said grimly. "Pack your things, we need to leave town tonight." "Where will we go?" "I have a friend with a cabin about 20 miles north. We'll lay low there until the marshal arrives." Within the hour, they were riding out of Redemption Grace on a sturdy mare Ethan had procured, him on his own gelding. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast Colorado sky. Under different circumstances, Grace might have found the midnight ride romantic. "I'm sorry about this," Ethan said as they rode side by side. "I never wanted to put you in danger." "I put myself in danger when I chose to speak the truth," she replied. "I don't regret it." He glanced at her, admiration evident even in the moonlight. "You're the bravest woman I've ever met, Grace Norwood." The cabin belonged to a former Army comrade of Ethan's who now worked as a trapper. It was small but solid, nestled in a grove of pines with a clear view of the approach from all sides. They arrived just before dawn, exhausted from the night's events. "You should rest," Ethan said, taking care of the horses while Grace explored their temporary refuge. "Take the bed." I'll keep watch. You need sleep too, she protested. We can take turns. He smiled tiredly. As the lady wishes. Grace slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by the memory of Mr. Prescott falling in the street, of Mayor Holloway's cold eyes as he called her hysterical, of the faceless men who had come for her in the night. When she awoke around noon, she found Ethan outside, splitting firewood with practiced efficiency. For 3 days, they existed in a strange domestic harmony in the isolated cabin. They took turns cooking simple meals, shared stories by the fire, and kept vigilant watch for any sign of pursuit. Grace discovered that Ethan was surprisingly well-read for a man who'd spent most of his life outdoors. He, in turn, seemed fascinated by her passion for teaching and her unwavering moral compass. "What will you do when this is over?" she asked on their 3rd evening as they sat before the fire. After Holloway and his associates are brought to justice, Ethan was silent for a long moment. "I've been chasing this for so long, I'm not sure I remember who I was before it began." "Perhaps it's not about remembering who you were, but discovering who you could be," Grace suggested softly. He looked at her then, his blue eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "When I first sought you out, it was because I needed your testimony, but now—" He paused, searching for words. "Now I find myself thinking about a future beyond this case. A future where I might hear your voice not just as a witness, but as—" "As what?" Grace whispered, her heart suddenly racing. Before he could answer, the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. Ethan was on his feet instantly, gun drawn. "Stay inside," he ordered, peering through the window. After a tense moment, he relaxed slightly. "It's all right. It's Marshal Davis." Grace joined him at the window to see 3 riders approaching a distinguished older man in a federal marshal's coat, flanked by 2 deputies. Ethan stepped outside to greet them and after a brief conversation waved for Grace to join them. "Miss Norwood," the marshal said, tipping his hat, "I've heard a great deal about you. Your article in the Redemption Herald caused quite a stir." "That was the intention, Marshal," she replied. "Well, it worked. We arrested Mayor Holloway yesterday morning, found him trying to flee with nearly $10,000 from the town treasury." Davis looked genuinely impressed. "Between your testimony, Ethan's evidence, and what we found in Holloway's possession, I'd say he's bound for a long stay in territorial prison." Relief washed over Grace like a cleansing rain. "And the others, his associates, we're rounding them up as we speak." This conspiracy went deeper than even Ethan suspected. The marshal turned to Ethan. "Speaking of which, I have something for you." He reached into his coat and produced a silver star. "The governor was impressed with your work, said the territories could use more men with your skills and integrity." Ethan stared at the deputy marshal's badge with surprise. "I'm not sure I'm cut out for official law enforcement, Davis." "Think about it," the older man replied. "You've spent years pursuing justice on your own. Imagine what you could accomplish with the law behind you." After the marshal and his deputies departed promising to return the next day to escort them safely back to town, Grace and Ethan found themselves alone again, the atmosphere between them charged with possibility. "A deputy marshal," Grace mused. "It suits you, does it?" Ethan asked, still turning the badge over in his hands. "I've been on my own for so long, answering to no one." "You've always answered to your conscience," she pointed out. "That's what drove you to pursue Holloway and the others." He set the badge aside and moved closer to her. "What about you? Will you return to teaching now that your name has been cleared?" "Perhaps. Though I think I might continue writing for the newspaper as well. I've discovered I have a voice that people will listen to." She smiled. "You helped me find that voice again, Ethan." "No," he said, taking her hands in his. "Your voice was always strong, Grace. When everyone else was silent, you spoke the truth, no matter the cost. It's why I sought you out. It's why I—" He paused, then continued with quiet intensity. "It's why I fell in love with you." Grace's heart seemed to stop, then race forward. "Ethan, I know it hasn't been long," he continued. "And perhaps this isn't the proper time or place, but I've spent too much of my life chasing ghosts and seeking vengeance. When I'm with you, I see a different future, one filled with purpose and hope." His blue eyes searched hers. "Your voice is all I hear now, Grace. It drowns out all the anger and pain that's driven me for so long." Tears blurred her vision as she realized that the connection she'd felt with this man from their first meeting had deepened into something profound. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you believed me without question," she admitted. "When the rest of the world called me a liar, your faith never wavered." Ethan drew her closer, one hand gently cradling her face. "I will always believe in you, Grace Norwood, always stand beside you when you speak your truth." When their lips finally met, it felt to Grace like the culmination of everything they'd endured, all the loneliness, danger, and uncertainty transforming into something beautiful and true. In Ethan's arms, she found not just safety but understanding, not just passion but respect. The next day, they rode back to Redemption, where Grace was greeted not as a troublemaker but as a heroine. News of Mayor Holloway's arrest had spread quickly, and her article was now being reprinted in newspapers across the territory. Parker offered her a permanent position as a writer for the Herald, which she accepted with the condition that she could also re-establish a small school for children who lived too far from the main schoolhouse. Ethan, after much consideration, accepted the deputy marshal's badge. "I'll be traveling sometimes," he told Grace, "following cases where they lead." "Then I'll be here when you return," she replied, writing the truth and teaching it to the next generation. 6 months later, they were married in Redemption's small church, the same community that had once welcomed Grace as a stranger, now celebrating her union with the man who had helped her bring justice to the territories. Marshall Davis stood as Ethan's best man, while several of Grace's students scattered wildflowers along the aisle. As they exchanged vows, Grace thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, how speaking an unwelcome truth had cost her everything, only to ultimately give her something far more precious. Ethan's words from that night in the cabin echoed in her heart, "Your voice is all I hear now." In the years that followed, that voice grew stronger. Grace's articles exposed corruption and championed reforms across the changing West. Ethan's work as a deputy marshal earned him respect throughout the territories, though he always arranged to return to Redemption as often as possible. They built a home on a small plot of land outside town, close enough for Grace to continue teaching and writing, with enough space for the family they hoped to create. 2 years after their wedding, their first child was born, a daughter they named Truth, a testament to the principle that had brought them together. Standing on the porch of their home, watching Ethan gently rock their newborn while the setting sun painted the Colorado sky in brilliant hues, Grace reflected on how far they'd come from that terrible day in Silver Creek. She had lost everything for speaking the truth, but in that loss had found her true voice and the one man who would always hear it, always believe it, always cherish it. In a world that had once silenced her, Grace Norwood Sandoval now spoke freely, loved deeply, and lived fully her truth, echoing across the wild frontier they called home.